If you have a really good personal trainer taking you through a leg exercise such as a squat or a lunge, you will always hear them say make sure that your knee is in its correct alignment. And let's have a look at that more from an anatomical point of view so you know why, and look at the long-term consequences if you don't. Now, generally speaking, when you do a squat or lunge, and there's many reasons why you should have good knee alignment, but let's just focus on the knee joint for now and not look at the other parts of the body that could be affected by poor knee alignment. Obviously, it's going to affect the knee. Now, what is very common when people squat is their knee tends to buckle in immediately. So if I'm squatting here, it goes in that way. Right? So basically what happens is your foot pronates and your knee buckles in that way. That's quite common, particularly for women, because women have what we call a high Q angle, means their angle with their femur coming off their pelvis more comes into the medial side. Therefore, it's more likely, due to that angle, that they're going to more likely pronate the feet and the knee will buckle in. But what you want to do is make sure that your knee is in a line probably with your big toe, if anything just on the outside of your big toe. Now I understand everyone's different biomechanically, but this is just a good general guideline to go by. So don't let your knee buckle in, keep it in line with your toes, a good trigger point or a good point to aim for. Why is that? Well, because when you look at the muscles that you're activating when you do a squat or a lunge, yeah, there's many muscles, but let's have a look at the muscles that go across the anterior aspect of the knee. You've got your quadriceps, you've got your rectus femoris, which is the one on top, you have the one underneath that, which is your vastus intermedius, then you have your vastus medius, which is on the medial side of the inside, and vastus lateralis, which is on the outside. Now, those four muscles, quadriceps, one of their responsibilities, apart from extending the knee, and rectus femoris flexes the hip, as you know, but one of its roles is to maintain good patella-femoral contact, or that alignment of the patella as it goes through the intercondylar groove of the femur. So here's the femur, then you have this groove, and you have these two smooth lumps, the condyles, that's your lateral condyle, that's your medial condyle, and they have your patella, which is a sesamoid bone, which is there for leverage, you increase the leverage across the knee joint, and as you move up and down or squat, you know, this patella will slide up and down in this groove like this little valley. So the vastus medialis, one on the inside, the vastus lateralis particularly, they have to cooperate with each other in a stabilizing effect to maintain good alignment of your patella as it goes through the groove. Now, the best way to make sure that your muscles are firing actively and properly in conjunction and in synchronization with each other is just to do the exercise with the correct technique and correct posture, and then the muscles will fire naturally because they'll fire to maintain that posture anyway. You don't have to go and do always have to do specific isolated exercises to activate a muscle if it's become inactive. You can activate it by putting the joint in its correct position, and that will refire it up due to that alignment. So what happens if you do the squat correctly, you get activation of your vastus lateralis and vastus medius. Your lateralis is a bigger one, and therefore they will cooperate together to extend the knee as well as maintain the gliding of the patella through the intercondylar groove in the femur. Now, what happens when your knee buckles in? When your knee buckles in, what happens is the vastus lateralis and the associated tissue, your ITB and all the fascia that connects to your gluteus maximus, that goes into a bit of a stretch. When a muscle goes onto a stretch, it activates it more, like an elastic band. When you stretch the elastic band, it develops more tension and activation. So what tends to happen when you pronate the feet or the knee buckles in, then your vastus lateralis will start to fire up a bit more so than medialis. And the medialis, if anything, will tend to decrease its firing. So now your vastus lateralis starts to take over. So you still get extension in the knee, but you get these unequal forces pulling on the patella as it glides in between the two condyles of the femur. So what tends to happen, you get a bit more force going this way from the lateral side of the patella, and over time it starts to pull the patella out of alignment. It starts to pull it to the lateral side, and then it starts to make contact with the lateral condyle of the femur, causing what we call, which is technically called patellofemoral syndrome, which is the most common injury in the knee joint. And many times that's caused because you start to dominate with the lateral muscles and your medial muscles start to become more inactive, or they don't fire as much. So what's important is maintain correct knee alignment so that doesn't occur, because once you have this imbalance there, it's actually quite tough to actually rehabilitate it. I've had it quite significantly in my right knee many decades ago, and it took me a good 12 months to actually rehabilitate it properly. I went to physios and therapeutic massage therapists and all sorts of stuff, and eventually I overcame it. But it was a tough journey because I just let it slide without knowing about it. So what's important is don't let it happen. Best way not to fall into a hole is don't step into it. Now, if you do have that patellofemoral syndrome, then make sure you go and see a physical therapist or a chiropractor or anyone you feel comfortable who's professional and understands how to rehabilitate it. And they all have different approaches, and I'm not going to go into that. But from an exercise point of view, what's important is to try to maintain a compound-based movement pattern, which is such squats and lunges, even if they're limited, shorter range of movement or low step-ups, and try to get that knee extension flexion in conjunction with hip flexion extension and ankle plantar flexion and dorsiflexion with your torsal stabilization, and that way at least you're going to rehabilitate it in its functional position, in a more compound nature, whilst activating with all the other associated muscles, not just the agonist muscles, the ones in the front, but also with your antagonist muscle groups, which also are highly involved in stabilization of the overall joint, maintaining the tibia onto the on the femur. So make sure your knees are in alignment, that way you're not going to have unequal forces going through the knee joint that could over time lead to patellofemoral syndrome, and that is actually quite painful, and that is no cow poo.